everyone. I am Vanessa Bowling-Adjavon, the Director of Administration and Human Resources at HACR. I hope you all made some great connections and reconnected with peers in today's first networking session. In our next session, Welcome to the Club, Transitioning to the C-Suite, we will discuss how to navigate C-Suite politics and leverage a succession strategy to advance your career. But before getting started, we have a few words from one of our sponsors, the Coca-Cola Company. Here to speak with us is Lori G. Billingsley, Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Coca-Cola Company.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Coca-Cola Company, welcome to the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibilities, HACR Executive Programs, Welcome to the Club, Transitioning to the C-Suite session. My name is Lori George Billingsley, and I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Coca-Cola Company. Coca-Cola is proud to be a corporate partner of HACR and pleased to be a co-host sponsor of this year's executive programs. There's a myriad of challenges that occur in the corporate setting for people of color, and HACR has a focused agenda to drive the inclusion of Hispanics in corporate America. Their executive programs offer real solutions and best practice examples to navigating challenges and helping professionals succeed in the workplace. Coca-Cola's purpose is to refresh the world and make a difference. Our aspiration is for our workforce to mirror the markets and communities we serve. This includes having more diverse representation at the highest levels of our company. We have two 2030 representation goals we aspire to achieve: to be 50% led by women globally, and in the U.S. to mirror the census ethnic race data. This means aiming for 18% Hispanic talent representation at every level. We are applying a very intentional hiring and retention lens with respect to Hispanic talent, from senior leadership to all levels of the organization. To ensure we make progress towards our goals, we will track the diversity of candidate slates and interview panels to measure progress and drive accountability. Working with partners like HACR provides us and other corporations access to important research, expertise, and insights that can help us achieve collective impact specific to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you for being part of HACR's executive programs. Please enjoy the upcoming session.
Thank you, Lori. And thank you again to the Coca-Cola Company for your continued support of Hispanic inclusion and HACR. Today's moderator is HACR's own Senior Vice President of Operations, Sylvia Pérez Cash. Welcome, Sylvia.
Hi, thank you, Vanessa. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. For today's conversation, I'm honored to be speaking with José Ramón González and Claudia Marmolejo. José is the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary of Equitable Holdings and a member of the company's management committee. In this role, José leads the law department with responsibility for all legal compliance, regulatory, and governmental affairs. Previously, he has held the positions of Executive Vice President and General Counsel for CNA Insurance, Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at QBE North America, and Group General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Taurus Insurance. José also has a long-standing commitment to the community and has served on a number of not-for-profit boards of directors. He currently serves as the chair of the board of directors of Latino Justice PROLDEF. Claudia Marmolejo is the executive director and the head of key client coverage for international wealth management at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Previously, Claudia was the chief investment officer for the Client Development Group. And prior to that role, she was an attorney for 10 years at the Morgan Stanley Legal and Compliance Department. Claudia was also the co-head of the firm's Latino Employee Network, which has a network of more than 1,500 employee members. She led that group from 2015 to 2022. Oh, she's currently leading it, excuse me. In the community, Claudia holds numerous positions as well. She's the second vice chair of the Board of Trustees for El Museo del Barrio and a member of the boards of Latino Justice Fund PROLDEF as well. She's also on the board of trustees for the Xavier University of Louisiana. Claudia, please join us.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you both today.
Nice to be here. Thanks so much for having us.
So let's jump right in. We're here to talk about the transition to the C-suite, particularly from the perspective of people of color and Latinos, and specifically. At a high level, one could describe an executive leadership transition in 4 categories: a transition for the business, a transition for the culture, a transition for the team, and a transition for the person in the new role. That's a lot of transition, wouldn't you say? And as one who's starting the new role in the C-suite level, whether it's for the first time or the second, third, or fourth time, like both of you, there's an expectation that you already know how to manage all of that change. And that's what I'm looking forward to getting into with you both today, your tips and insights about how to manage that change when you're this person trying to take advantage and trying to succeed in this opportunity. Jose, we'll start with you. I know this topic is top of mind for you especially because you're nearing the end of your first 100 days in your new role. So first, before we jump into the question, I'll ask you, do you feel a sense of relief at accomplishing this milestone? The first 100 days.
You know, it's, yeah, you know, actually I do. I think it was, you know, for me, it was a transition. I had done a transition to a similar role about 2 years ago. So I think I was lucky in the sense that I had it fresh in my head. And so I definitely do feel I'm reaching my 100 days is in a couple of weeks. And I've been ticking through my list of everything I needed to do. I'd come up with a plan earlier on. And so I think I'm doing pretty well so far.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the list because I think we all want to hear about it. Can you share how you approached this transition? How have you spent the last almost 100 days?
Yeah, look, I think the 100 days is really the most important piece of your whole career at the organization that you're starting at. You know, it's where you establish, it's where people really meet you as a leader in the organization. And so the way that you're perceived by your team, by the executive suite, by the sort of general population at a company is hugely important. So I think the first thing I did was really, even before I started, really was, try to gather as much information as I could. I think a lot of people probably know that already, right? Learn as much about the company as you can. You do through the interview process, but also just, in the lead up, right? To just get acclimated to the new organization. But I think the key is really having a plan, a strategic plan on how, on what you're going to do during those 100 days. And it doesn't need to be super complicated. Mine was only a few pages long. It wasn't, I didn't have a consultant do it, right? I did it myself. It was something that I was building it as I was ticking off things on the list. But I think a really good, concise plan that focuses on how you're going to, introduce yourself to the organization, socialize yourself with your team, understand the business, and really establish yourself with your peers and your CEO. Those are really the main things you need to focus on.
Thank you, Jose. Now, Claudia, I think you may have a slightly different perspective, or maybe the same, because you've also experienced this transition many times over, but within the same company. So one of the things Jose mentioned is that this period allows your new team and your new company to get to know you. But in your case, your company did know you. So could you maybe speak to this from your perspective as well? And how do you typically leverage your first 100 days?
Sure. So I transitioned within Morgan Stanley. I was in the legal department as a lawyer for many different clients. And one of my clients asked that I join her team as COO of that team. And it was a client development team working with the top clients of the firm. So it was a completely different skill set that you had to really leverage without really never losing your risk appreciation and your understanding of reputation risk and other types of risks that you always have in mind as a lawyer. But the first 100 days were mostly about listening, really actively listening to what was happening, what were the challenges, where were the blind spots, and obviously to get to know the team players, the team under you, the team that you're going to be supporting, to see what is your value add, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be kept the same, what needs to be improved. And I think that's kind of the plan that Jose was talking about, get to know everyone and identify the gaps, and then you make actionable items out of those gaps, and you identify how your skill set really can be leveraged in the new role.
Thank
you identify opportunities for disruption, opportunities for growth and ingenuity. And I think that's the funnest part of the 100 days, to start designing how the world should look like.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you mentioned also the idea of identifying these opportunities. And in the context that you were speaking, and you as well, Jose, it's about identifying the opportunities for the team, for the company, as you bring in a new perspective. But what about how you've approached identifying these opportunities for career advancement? And in some cases, I want to talk a little bit about the role of a succession strategy and whether that's a tool that either one of you have been able to leverage, particularly you, Claudia, in your role at Morgan Stanley. Could you describe if you've used this technique or this tool and how?
Yeah, I think it's something that any business leader needs to focus on, your succession as well as your own career advancement. I think it starts with building a great team under you that has similar values, that is focused on the same value add, getting to know them, nurture them well, provide them the training, make sure that you seek alignment of priorities, values, objectives, and goals. You cultivate their ideas, you raise their voices, and you share your platform, which is so unusual these days and so needed, that every spot that we can offer to someone that works with us is to share that platform, to let others see that they're also able to step up and take on more responsibilities, more exposure, and hopefully to be prepared for the next stage in their careers as well. And recently, I myself just joined a board as an advisory board, which also means, pivoting to another step of my career when I'm asked to render advice to companies that are private in this case, and then get them set up for the next level. So another transition as well.
Well, congratulations on that,
you.
Claudia. We're all very proud of you on behalf of us there. Well, so I want to talk about this a little bit more. Earlier in today, we talked about executive sponsorship and this idea of kind of using succession, creating your own succession plan as a part of your successful leadership, both as you're looking forward to a future career move or preparing the teams behind you. So briefly, maybe, could you just speak to kind of how you view executive sponsorship as part of your transition in the C-suite, and how you even approach kind of developing those new relationships from your new role?
I think it always starts with seeking guidance, humbly requesting, someone to let them share with you their guidance as to how you can position yourself for that next level, how you can earn the trust and support of the people that you are working with. But I think you already have the executive sponsorship, otherwise you wouldn't be there. So it's not about getting it, it's about maintaining it, nurturing, and hopefully expanding it to other areas within the same organization. So getting to know them, look for shared values, shared missions, make, for the shared common ground that sometimes it's, something that we don't think about, even though it should be quite the first step. And then build from it and seek guidance. I think no one is ever offended when you ask for guidance. I think it puts the person on the same side of the table. It removes any egos or any perception of egos. And I think it's always great to hear what others have to provide, advice they can provide for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Claudia said. I think everything she said was, completely on point, and it all leads to really building that relationship. I think many times, especially at more junior levels, we wonder who our sponsors are, and I think sometimes people believe that if you just wait, the sponsors will show up. I always thought that I had to find my sponsors, and I think that seeking advice and finding shared values is really great, and it keeps building a relationship with someone that you can meet today and can serve as a sponsor of yours at some point down the line. And I think we're always looking. I mean, both Claudia and I are in relatively very senior roles, but we still need sponsors. I think all of us are always trying to maintain those relationships and continue to build them, and then serve as sponsors to others who may need it along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jose. It's about service to others as well. And, the funny part about the senior roles or the more executive roles is that you really work for the people that work for you. And never forgetting that, I think it's really important to think of everyone you work with as a client, and then how you service a client, how you add value to a client, and how you align rewards with the behaviors that you want to see.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that as well, Claudia, because I think in order to do any of those things, you have to have a vision, right? And, you know, some would say that having a vision for your role when you transition to the C-suite is the most important thing of your transition. In fact, in 2015, McKinsey came out with a study, a survey that showed executives rate the creation of a shared vision as the most important transition activity when joining the C-suite. I'd love for you both to comment on, first, do you agree with that statement? Is that something that you've experienced as well? And then secondly, what guidance would you offer to those who are preparing for this particular aspect of the C-suite transition? Who would like to start?
José, you do that.
I'll kick it off. You know, definitely you have to, I think in everything you do, you have to have a vision of why you're there. And for me, though, the vision hasn't necessarily changed. It's always been about building the best team that I can build, right? And supporting that team and getting it to do the best it can, right? So to me, the vision doesn't necessarily change. How you carry out that vision is always up to the circumstances that you have around you. And so you definitely want to, you know, assess the situation around you and then implement that vision with respect to the team you have. But it always starts, I think it starts and ends with your team and making your team as successful as possible.
Yes, and looking for independent thinkers, looking for their values, their motivations, their resilience, the passion for the work, the alignment of focus. It's really about the team. I couldn't agree with you more, José.
Thank you both. So another question that we have that comes up when I think about this topic is about culture. And I think of culture as the elephant, the silent but very large elephant in the room. Because as we all know, culture can eat strategy for lunch any day. You can have the best strategic plan, you can have the best vision, but if you're not really taking into consideration and dealing with the culture of the environment that you're in, then you're going to fail. However, in the context of D&I, in the context of particularly for people, many people of color in these roles, that concept of a culture fit is really complicated. It's very nuanced, it's very dynamic, it's very complex. Especially when you extend that to what we really hope to achieve, a sense of inclusion and belonging as a member of the team, as a member, as a contributor to this culture. So what is your advice, and José, or Claudia, excuse me, I'd like to start with you. What is your advice to a new C-suite member who recognizes the need to confront these cultural minefields on their team?
Yeah, the way I think about culture, I think it's really incredibly important, and hopefully no one is underestimating the power of culture or lack thereof. I think it's really the glue that binds us together, either in a company, in a family, in a nation, right? At the end of the day, it's culture. It's the only thing that we all should have in common, at least for the beginning of something that we all have in common. And in a way, the interesting thing about corporations that they set these core values, which hopefully give you information as to what is the mission, what is the purpose, the impact that the company intends to have. I think reading those core values is becoming a very clear indication of the culture. That's the published culture. Obviously, there's another culture once you walk in. But I think it's really very important to set yourself with a personal board of directors, people that you trust, people that you can bounce off ideas, express frustration, make sure that they can give you sound advice when you are looking for direction, when you have a new problem that you may have 5 solutions, but maybe you don't know which one to implement. I think it's really important to know that you've earned your spot. Now you have the opportunity to really leverage it, to use it for others, and to hopefully close blind spot that they might be there even in the culture. I think we all are ambassadors of our culture, and I take that flag and I run with it every single day.
Thank you, Claudia. José, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I think on culture, first of all, for me, I've made some switches over the last few years. I think trying to assess the culture as much as you can before you land the spot is also very important. You want to pick an organization where where you think you're going to be successful, right? Where the culture is going to allow you to succeed. But, we shouldn't let that overwhelm us. I think a lot of times, the stated culture, as Claudia indicated, may not be exactly in line with the actual culture when you get there. But at the end of the day, you make decisions and you work with them. And I don't think any of us should. We have to I think especially for people of color, you need to really try to understand the culture. You need to try to work with the culture that's there to figure out how you can succeed within the context of the culture. But I also think that you are a change agent within that culture, especially in these senior roles. You should not underestimate that you're just that you also can affect that culture, and you also have a huge influence in picking people in your team that will also be change agents in that culture. So I think the cultural piece is really important. It's important to really understand it, to try to understand it, but it's also important for you to change it for the better, and to empower other people to want to change it in the right direction.
Thank you. I'm glad you both mentioned these statements of knowing your worth and seeing yourself as a change agent. I think that is critical. I'm so glad you raised that with our audience today. I also want to address another feeling that maybe doesn't come up as much in conversation when we're talking about these really significant career transitions, and that's the feeling of vulnerability, right? This is a large transition. It's a large job. They're complex, the scale, there's competing priorities, a lot of things that at first are very exciting, and they should be. But after time, they could begin to feel overwhelming, and that's the word, Jose, that you just used. So could you speak, maybe, Jose, specifically, since this is so recent? I don't know if you had this experience in this role or in previous roles, but is there a time where you felt that the transition began to overwhelm your initial excitement about the role? And then how did you manage that vulnerability, and what resources did you use?
Yeah, I think in this transition that I've recently done, I think I was probably the most prepared I've been, right? And I think I mentioned earlier that I had recently transitioned. So I, sort of had enough experience under my belt. But I would say that in any transition, I think we're all human. I think we're all, getting involved in something that's new to us. Definitely at some point, you can be the most secure person, confident person, but at some point you feel like you're a little bit in over your head. And look, that's natural. I think we're growing when we feel that we're a little bit over our head. We try to swim a little bit harder so we can get our heads above the water. And what I've done there is, first of all, I think you need to, just take a deep breath and sort of assess the situation you're in. I think it's also super important to reach out to others, to reach out to resources. Claudia's point on your personal board of directors, those are the people that are around you. Some of them may not even realize. I know probably, many of mine don't realize that they're on my board of directors, but there's, we all should have a group of people that we can go out to and get support from, and get direction and guidance. And so for me in the past, having those individuals there, knowing that they're looking at things from my perspective and for my best, right, the best outcome for me, have always been really, assuring. And so I think that you want to line up those people. You always want to have those people in the background and call on them when you need that. And that's reassuring to have that support. And it lets you look, at the end of the day, you're the one who figures it out. You're the one who overcomes it. But we all overcome things with the support of others. And so that's what the way I've gone about it in the past.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with you also, Jose, that the need to surround yourself with a support system that is there for those days that are not the best days, when, we all have our moments when the pressure is on, the spotlight is on, there's no margin for error, and you feel a bit overwhelmed by the circumstances. But I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't get distracted by these thoughts, and it's really about breaking the problem or the situation in different smaller pieces, and hopefully they become a bit more manageable, and always looking for advice where you find it. and really like take a deep breath and go for it. Be intentional about addressing the situation, not hide away from it.
Great. So I have a follow-up, but before I get into it, I will say to the audience, we have about 5 more minutes, and then we will open it up to Q&A. So a few questions have come in. Please keep them coming. We will get to them. So I do think it's interesting. Both of you answered that question from the perspective of the individual, right? But the company is as invested in the success of your transition or the C-suite member's transition as anybody else. You know, the hiring process alone is a significant investment. They really want this person that they selected to be successful. So, and maybe you could both speak to this. Jose, we'll start with you. What advice would you give to the companies who are seeking to better support their leadership, who are going through their C-suite transitions? What information or resources, you know, that did you find useful when managing your transition that a company could think about providing as well?
Yeah, you know, I also, I mean, you know, the other thing I think I've been really lucky on is that at least this last transition, the company was the best prepared that I've ever seen on a transition plan. So I think they had a transition plan. There was a lot of onboarding that there were a lot of different people thinking about onboarding for me, from the CEO to the HR to my legal team, right? So there was a lot of different pieces. And I think companies really do have to think about an onboarding plan. It doesn't need to be incredibly detailed, but there needs to be effort there put in place. And people that are supporting you. I mean, I've found it that, and this has to do a little bit more with the culture, because you could have the best plan, but if the people aren't behind it to really support it. So I found that companies really, making sure that the hidden curriculum is as exposed as possible to that new individual, right? Giving them as much information that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get from any other place. I think all those have been, are what companies should be looking at. I would add, and something that I have now is, before I even start, somebody said to me, "Oh, we're going to give you an executive coach." And I was like, sure, why not? I mean, and that's been really helpful. The executive coach knows our chair, he knows our CEO really well. He works with them as their executive coaches. And so that's really helpful for me, because I have a lot of insight into what's going on, and somebody to really bounce things off of that really gets it. Now, look, your companies may not, someone may land in a role and these things are not offered to them. Well, then I think it's incumbent on you to get the onboarding in place, to really prod the company to be ready for you, and to make sure that you have a successful landing and launch.
Yes,
thank you.
That
Claudia, please.
COVID, we are really in front of a tipping point, a transformational time because of COVID and hopefully the learnings that we've accomplished through COVID. So I think the executives that we need to be thinking about for the future, which starts hopefully now, it's a very different mindset than the one that we needed pre-COVID. It's, people that are more flexible, adaptive, that have really new skills, more technology, and more technologically focused, more flexibility, more adaptability, more resilience. We've seen the power of resilience, how important it was during this time, and I think it will continue to be as we establish what the future looks like. I think a collaborative approach is also very needed, because no area has all the answers. It's about working together to find the best outcome, and to be focused on what's going to be disruptive and where are you going to, which end of the disruption are you going to be, the disrupted or the disrupting. So I think it's really important to focus on what is needed for the next stage, which is not the same that we needed pre-COVID.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, and we will get back to that after the Q&A. So I do want to open it up to the audience. We have some questions rolling in. So I'll start with, this question about your superpowers. Amelie Homer asked a question. She said, what are your backgrounds, and do you use your diversity as a superpower? And if so, how has it shown up in your leadership roles? Claudia, you've mentioned this a little bit, so maybe you can start with and elaborate.
Sure. I think my superpower is being a Latina. I think, I'm an expert in logistics as a mother, as a board member. I also serve on, 4 not-for-profit boards and now an advisory board. I have interests and hobbies. So I think my superpower has to do with being a Latina, incredibly collaborative, to try to, bring the voice of the people that don't have the voice at these levels. I think because of the accent, I'm from Argentina originally, the spotlight will always be on me the minute I speak up. And I'll be more remembered than anyone else in the room because I'm different. I look different. And when I speak, it's even more clear that I'm not from here. I think my cultural diversity is also incredibly rewarding to the company I work for. I work with international clients that like to feel and see themselves represented there. Because, when you talk about wealth, you're talking about really personal issues. And they don't have to explain everything. They don't have to explain, let's say the disruption in Latin America. We understand it. We know who the president is. We know what's going on in the country. And I think that the fact that they don't have to go there, explain the mere basics in their mind is incredibly familiar for them. And it becomes a closer relationship much faster and much more intimate and deep than otherwise. So I think my cross-cultural abilities, as well as my being a Latina, is my superpower.
Thank you, Claudia. Jose?
And so while Claudia's superpower is being a Latina, my superpower is being a Latino. And so my background was maybe slightly different than Claudia's. I was born in New York and grew up in New Jersey, not really too far away from Midtown Manhattan. And but I grew up in a bicultural environment, right? I didn't speak English till I was 5, so I went to school, and we always, all of us, all my friends were Latino. We grew up in an environment where we were constantly switching from one, from one culture to the next, and so that ability to sort of fit into the situation that you were in, at first I think some of us try to downplay that cultural ability because it's not the majority view, but at some point in my career, I really did try to pivot to that, and I have always found it to be really useful. It allows me a wider spectrum of skills and ability to maneuver situations and maneuver people. Our ability to make connections with individuals really quickly is, I think, another part of that Latino skill that I think we all can use in the corporate environment, especially in transitions. And I think Claudia also mentioned that when she walks into a room, she's not forgotten. I mean, I think all of us should really try that when we walk to the room, that we're also not forgotten. In many ways, all of us are trailblazers in our roles. It'll be recognized to one extent or another, to some people to a larger extent than to others. But all of us are different in a way, and that's the uniqueness that we bring to a situation. We should try to leverage it. We should never try to hide it. But we should try to bring others along with it, right? And we bring it out not for exclusion, but for inclusion. And so again, I think my superpower is being a Latino.
Thank you both. I think we would all agree from the HACR perspective that is a superpower for all of us here. Wonderful. So I have another question from Carmen Kingston, and I'm going to adapt it just a little bit. So she wants to know about your biggest learning in the new roles, but I'm going to phrase it this way. If you were taking your very first C-suite transition again, what is the lesson that you wish you had known the first time you made this transition versus now? Claudia.
Sure. I think it's, before you join the C-suite, you see them as walking gods, and you think, wow, they were born here, and they weren't born there. They got there. And so it's about learning about their journeys. How did they make it? What mistakes they learned from? How do they pick themselves up from when they fell? And they all fell. They all had to learn from their own failure. So it's what you do with it. It's not, it will happen. It's sooner or later, it'll happen. And, you may lose support of someone. How do you get it back? And so I think there's a lot of learnings that we can leverage from others. And I think you never stop learning. And I think you see that there's vulnerability all around you at the C-suite as well. They're human just like us. They have the same fears and maybe they even have concerns. And so it's important to have an open dialogue and to give space for those issues to come out and not hide from them.
Thank you, Claudia. Jose?
Yeah, I think if I thinking back to my first C-suite role, I think if I sort of had any learning from it is that I probably felt like I wasn't sure if I belonged or if I felt that I deserved or that I had earned in some way or merited the seat at the table in a way. And I thought that was, I think when you earn that seat at the table, it's yours, and it's for it's not yours to ask for forgiveness. It's yours to really use it, to the extent that you can. And so for me, the learnings was more about that, right? That when you get to that role, it's really important that you own it and that you use it, not use it for your benefit, but use it for the benefit of others. But you really, take advantage of that platform, take advantage of that role, make sure that you believe that you're as equal as anyone else and as deserving. Like Claudia said, and I think it was a little bit of, the point that Claudia said, these people are not gods, they're mere mortals. And so, when you as a mere mortal get there, you realize that they are mere mortals and that you deserve as much as they did. So I think owning that and really being a part of that is what I learned after my first C-suite role.
Thank you. Great. Well, we have another question here, this time from somebody who is abroad. So this person didn't leave their name, but they took a global assignment. And recognizing that it's very difficult for them to be their authentic self wherever they are in the world. So could you share any experiences or advice that you may have on how to manage either a global assignment or department meetings that have global executives when you're that new C-suite member?
Jose, you go first.
I'll go first. So my first C-suite role was as general counsel of a Bermuda-based private equity-owned insurance company, and it was London market. So my CEO, most of the executive team, 2/3 of my team were all located in the UK. I ended up spending the 3 years that I was there about 120 days a year in the UK, so I was there quite often. And I don't think any of us should doubt that when you go to the UK, it's a different culture altogether. And look, I think I in some ways there was no, you were sort of an equal in a way that you were just like any other foreigner that was there. So perhaps there weren't some of the negativities you might have in the US, but at the same time, you were sort of a fish out of water. And I think, and I had a really successful 3 years there at the company until we finally sold it. And I would say that the success why I was successful was because I was able to really lean on that cross-cultural background and pull from it. So it wasn't the US and it wasn't, Latin America, but it was a different culture. And so you kind of, you adapt to it in a way and you learn from it. That it's not, it's another culture that you need to learn, just like the one that I had to learn when I was a little kid in New Jersey, right? So I think I just really, leveraged off my prior experiences.
Great,
and
thank
as
you.
an immigrant myself, I think bringing your authentic self is non-negotiable. I think that's something you owe to yourself, regardless. And if that's uncomfortable for others, that's something they need to learn from rather than you adapting to that. I think the amount of energy you could waste by trying to cover who you really are could be exhausting and disruptive and distracting from your actual purpose and meaning. So I would never compromise that. I would try to find common ground. I think we are much more alike than we sometimes think. I think that it's really about looking for that binds us together. Maybe it's the sports, the hobbies, the children, you name it. We have much more in common than we don't. And I think it's about trying to be present, trying to show that the people that you work with matter to you. Even though they're different, they still have a lot you're together for a purpose, maybe for a long time, maybe for a short time, but it should be something that you're intentional about, trying to be present, even though you're global, trying to touch base with the people in different areas. So I used to cover all in America for Citigroup. Then I also have a global role, and I think having a call in the morning just to say, how are you doing, particularly in these times, how is it going? What can I support you with? What's going on top of having touch points, hopefully weekly, if you can afford it, with your teams to really understand what's happening, and then maybe one level down, so you can have an open dialogue and really get to know what's happening in your organization. I think those are ways to bridge those issues that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think also like being just interested in the culture that you're in. I think that goes a long way to sort of opening doors, right? So, not coming in as the arrogant person who doesn't understand what's going on locally, right? Taking an interest in the new culture that you're exposed in. Look, I think, there's a lot there to work on, right? So, the interest that you may have in the culture sort of is flattering to the folks there. The finding common values, that we all have common values that we can build off of, but you always have to bring your authentic self. It's where you can really demonstrate your uniqueness. And I think none of us should shy away from that.
Thank you. So we have only a couple more minutes of Q&A. I can't believe it. I'm trying to squeeze in 2 more questions. So the first one is about mentorship, but I'm going to kind of massage it a little bit, because we talked about the board of directors in that role. We talked about your personal board of directors, I should say, your personal support networks. We've talked about your team as, being in service to your team, and that being a key part of how you're developing relationships. But maybe we could just take a moment to reflect on our relationship with our peers, right? The C-suite is in itself a team that we've referenced, that has its own culture, that, has its own goals. So maybe you could speak to about the importance of those relationships and how you've gone about building the relationships you need on your own C-suite team.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick it off. I think right now I'm in the process of doing that at my own company. And so I'm sort of learning as, I've done this before, but you're always learning something new. Look, people on your C-suite team could be your biggest supporters in many ways, right? You will probably be interacting with them more than with the CEO. And so the CEO will be relying on their opinions of you as the new person on how you're doing, where your strengths and weaknesses are, etc. So, I mean, the tactic I've always used is to just make sure that I'm adding value to them, right? As peers, but what uniqueness do I bring to the situation? Clearly, as a lawyer, there's an area there that I can easily cover. And then how do I support them in their roles? And I think that's really the key. That's really the key to it, right? It's finding where you can add value, where you can support them, and building those relationships in that way. I also think, as peers, I think sometimes there's a bit of competitiveness in organizations. I think you should try to leave that behind or avoid that as much as possible. Rather, I would urge people to be more generous with their peers and try to support them, even as you're coming in, right? To support them. I think that would be really appreciated in many ways, and it will pay benefits in the future.
Great. So Claudia, I know you probably want to say something, and unfortunately we are out of time. And so I want to do a very deep thank you, a sincere thank you on behalf of us there and behalf of all of our attendees here at our executive conference. This has been an amazing conversation. I think we've touched on, concepts of, ownership and being secure in owning your value, owning your position on these teams, investing in your relationships in a very intentional way, and of course, having your own vision. That's collaborative, but very intentional. So I want to thank you for all those insights. And with that, I will ask Vanessa Bowling-Ahaban to come back and welcome us to our next session. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Claudia and Jose, for your valuable advice.